Hey all, Siege here, and welcome to episode 1 of, let's call it a continuation of Siege thoughts for now. But this is where I will go over aspects of the lore in a less formal manner in order to present my thoughts on certain things within the game that maybe don't translate as well to the typical videos produced on the channel, as well as giving me a vessel to enter some of the community's more obscure or even less understood facets of the story to the best of my knowledge and comprehension, based upon a decade of trying to figure out what DE is trying to tell us in game and putting it all together into a cohesive tale. And in the spirit of obscure tales in Warframe, I think, given the channel's history, it's only fitting to center the first episode around perhaps my favorite Warframe topic, the Indifference, but from the perspective of one of the most enigmatic characters we've been presented in game. One whose story has been a slow burn of sometimes significant reveals imperative to the operator's story, yet the full context or answers required to truly understand what was happening, well, it just always seemed largely beyond our collective grasp to fully interpret. But that may not be the case for much longer. Of course, I am talking about the original Tenno outcast, Rell. That's right, kiddos. Anyone familiar with the content that I've put out on this channel will know how excited this particular topic gets me. Maybe more than anything else, because after all, the lore implies Rell has some kind of power over the Indifference itself. Now, before we get too deep into this, I'd like to first thank the channel's members. I can't tell you how appreciative I am of your support, but also feel just blessed to know that you value my content enough to help out as you do. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Also, I can't forget my longtime channel support in G Fuel, a product I still use to this day, and given its longevity on the market, I believe that speaks volumes as to its actual effectiveness and preference among many who, like myself, need a bit of a boost mentally at times. And the fact that I've tried so many and only choose to continue to use a few, this being one of them, is about the best endorsement I can give. So thanks again for all the continued support. For now, what you all, or maybe I all, have been dying to discuss is Rell. Rell is, in my opinion, the most interesting operator of them all, perhaps even more interesting than our operator, in that his history is a much, let's say, more active role against the Indifference, versus ours being a more passive role, at least from the perspective of what we've seen so far. We have been largely sought out by the Indifference, offered power. We've taken it and really don't have much of what I would consider a good understanding of how it works, how it would be any type of effective against the man on the wall. But somehow, some way, Rell is different in the fact that he was able to figure out the Indifference to at least a point where he could, in fact, challenge it. And I think that is one of the most significant things, given the fact that Rell he's a child. Now, bear in mind, Rell is, at least through the Chains of Harrow quest, appears to have some type of condition in game. Now, it has been said by two different people within DE what's actually going on here. In one breath, Rebecca's confirmed that Rell is autistic, but at the same time, Steve Sinclair actually said at one point that he had Asperger's syndrome. So while they're both on the autism spectrum, Asperger's is a bit, let's say, more specific in what you might find within different symptoms and whatnot. The only reason why I want to bring this up right now is that Rell may exhibit two different characteristics. And I've said this in videos before. And I do think that this is relevant. That whereas perhaps society would perceive these things as, let's say, a disability, within the context of this story, they are in fact not that, and what I would say are a significant strength. The first is the idea that Rell shows little emotion to begin with, and I think that's very important for dealing with the man on the wall. As we've seen, the man on the wall specifically kind of feeds off of emotion. It may power him even, further. And I think that's something that's even brought up during the Chains of Harrow quest, that we make him stronger through the type of containment of emotions and essentially the different things that are going on. Rell's actually telling us throughout the story that we're making him stronger. And I think that that's one of the things that makes Rell such a formidable opponent to the man on the wall, is that Rell is innately equipped to handle things that other operators, other Tenno themselves have to be taught. The whole purpose behind the Tales of Duviri and the idea that when coming into conjunction or coming into contact with the void, one needs to keep their emotions significantly in check. And like I said, whereas for a young child who might see things like especially what they experienced on the Zariman 10-0, whenever everything was, kind of going to hell, literally, which we may actually find out now that it was literally, right? But that idea that most children, even ones that, let's say, were very, very interested in attempting to guard themselves against, being emotional, there's only so much that you can do as far as, becoming fully stoic, in the sense of you just deciding that you're going to do that. Certain things are going to happen that even the most stoic person is going to jump at, right? But, as I mentioned before, the fact that perhaps the emotions don't show, even if they're being felt, may have been some type or some level of filter or guard that the indifference could not break. And I do think that's actually kind of implied within the Rell webcomic, especially how in control Rell seems during all of the chaos that's happening during the faulty void jump with the Zariman 10-0. And I think that I've even made the observation that given the language within the Chains of Harrow quest and the language that we get within the new war, specifically when we make the deal with the man on the wall, what I noticed is the verbiage is exactly the same, in that they are saying that Rell saved all of the operators. And they use it in a way that mimics exactly what's said in the new war when the man on the wall says that to our operator. And I wonder, with all the different types of manipulated memories and things that we experience within Warframe, it was just something that I postulated, that is it possible that what we're seeing at that moment wasn't necessarily even our operator, but rather Rell's experience? Rell giving all of the other Tenno the actual power. It's tough to say. There are a lot of similarities there, but at the same time, I think that you can easily make the argument the other way, that there's tons of evidence that suggests that our operator had its own experience, its own scenario with the man on the wall, and that stuff is, synonymous with what actually happened to our operator. But like I said, there is this level of symmetry between those two quests that it's hard for someone who, especially who's played them so many times, and like when certain things are said, it's like I can hear that other quest, like the exact same things are happening, right? So it's very hard for me to not see that connection. And given, they are very much tied, it's the same exact situation. What we are essentially experiencing in the Chains of Harrow is what was experienced in the New War, but one would be from the perspective of Rell, and then in the New War would be from the perspective of our operator. But around the same time, essentially that would be when the Zerman 10-0 was going to hell, as I've mentioned multiple times. And you could take that particular quote on different levels. So the idea that there's this one Tenno out there that has somehow, be it through a personal sacrifice or whatever, can contain the man on the wall is exceptionally significant. Especially when we're under the guise, at least for most of us, I believe, that this version of the man on the wall, this corrupted entity, is born of Albrecht and Trotty and the things that, initiated void travel and the void into the origin system in the first place. It would be one thing for the person who could and is legitimately challenging face to face the indifference to be Albrecht and Trotty. But of course, we know that Albrecht and Trotty is essentially running from the indifference. So he's taking a completely different route than Rell did. Rell decided that he would stand and fight. And this comes to the next aspect of what I was going to talk about here, as far as, again, this is Asperger's in particular. And that is obsession with the topic. Now, I understand. I think with autism, there's different levels of things. What's important here is no matter what you are saying, if it's autism, Asperger's, or some disability that is specific to the origin system that we don't really know about and is based upon the things that we experience in our reality. Regardless, it's this obsession with a topic that is specifically brought out again in the Rell comic, where you see him say, I have something to do, someone to figure out. Now, you give an operator who already seems to be incredibly intelligent in certain aspects of especially space travel, as earlier in the Chains of Harrow quest, whenever Rell is going through his flashcards with Kay, his mom, he blurts out some stuff about the Brankel gap constant and all this other stuff, and she's completely overwhelmed, having pretty much no idea what he's even talking about. So you put that type of intelligence, that type of one-track mindedness, and then you offer them some type of void power, as Rell obviously had, at least to some degree. And now you have a very formidable opponent. And I have been dying to see where this story is going to go, because DE keeps giving us breadcrumbs. It's continued on and on and on. It wasn't just that at the end of the Chains of Harrow, we see Rell in a state where, to be completely honest, I don't even understand what's completely happening. You could make the argument that that's Rell's soul, and Rell's soul is being released into the ether, essentially. But that would be just a speculation. Because so far, as we've seen at least, the operators are undying. So when Rell's sacrifice is brought into mind, how did he know that this was going to work? Because that sacrifice would have been, that's a forever type situation. Further, I think the question that many of us have had after the Chains of Harrow quest, but as a continuing type thing, is how did he get a Warframe? Warframes aren't just things that people just leave around, they're usually purpose built. They usually have a reason why they're built. And I think you see that in a lot of different situations. So with that in mind, you have to ask yourself, how did he or the Red Veil get their hands on one of these things? And as the story has unfolded more and more, and that information has kind of become, let's say, a little bit more detailed, it makes you wonder even more. How was he able to get a Warframe? And now we have the introduction of the Devil's Triad. And specifically, Rebecca has now said twice. Well, she first sent out an interesting little tweet that said rap, tap, tap, and it showed Harrow. The idea of her making that tweet a thing right before the dev stream that we saw here just recently obviously was a clear indication that the man on the wall, if nothing else, was going to have some kind of significance within this quest. And I think we all assumed that. But seeing the Donda that was sitting on Father Leon's desk, the thing that Rell would needed in order to focus his thoughts, is very interesting for a couple different reasons. We're going to get into that in a second. But even before that, there was another thing that we only found out about a long time after the Chains of Harrow. And that was, at the moment that the chains were broken, Rell was freed, and the indifference was essentially piggybacked onto the operator. Within Duviri, something happened as well. And that was what they called the Reign of Chains. Now, curiously enough, a character named Garmy, who was guarding a Saraglass lighthouse and would continuously talk about keeping his eye out for what is largely assumed as the Great Indifference, keeping kind of a tab on it, if you will. Only at that moment was Garmy's death a thing that occurred.
In the splendid lands on this side of the wall lives happy Mathila, and she has 2 children. She also had a husband in her yesterdays. When I have attempted to talk to her about him, she has simply frozen, like a rat before a snake. His name was Garmy, and he was keeper of the Saraglass Lighthouse on Watcher's Island. The lighthouse served no true purpose, yet he kept its lamp burning, beaming out into the void as if to call travelers home. Now, before his death, Garmy confided in me that he felt his role was important. He was keeping it at bay. Void storms were not unknown in Duviri, but the storm I shall speak of was unlike others. It hung in a red veil across the sky. There was a great sound like tearing metal, and all at once a pelting rain fell. Not water, but broken metal chains in lengths and coils and great rattling whip strands. The falling chains shattered roofs and windows, slashed through screaming livestock, and maimed the fools who had not come in from the streets. I found Garmi's log in the toppled ruin of the lighthouse. With admirable presence of mind, he describes a form steadily approaching out of the void. A monstrous hand, possessed of only 3 fingers and a thumb. With the lighthouse gone, Watcher's Island crumbled, and was gone too, within 3 spirals. Garmi has no grave nor memorial, as if he had never lived. But I remember, and so I record.
And this is one of the main reasons why Mathila is the way she is. That, of course, is Garmi's wife. And anytime you've been in Duviri, you have a pretty good idea that Mathila has some issues. She's got some problems, even though she tries to play it off as continuously being happy. She has quite the dark past now, and it's something that when she speaks about it, it almost makes her freeze in trauma because of how much it affected her. And what's interesting is you kind of find out through a couple different facets of the lore that it was through Mathila that Nessie found her way into Duviri. So you can see the cracks kind of forming within Duviri as well, in that world as it is kind of in the origin system. Not only that, but anybody that's played through the Hex Quest knows that if you pass by a very particular radio, kind of sitting out in the middle of nowhere, first floor, Halvania Mall, you'll hear Rell's voice. Now, that radio in particular, I don't even know what to think about it because it's so weird. And I don't think a lot of people talk about it, but it's constantly flipping channels, right? It's constantly back and forth, different things that are in there. And I think there's a couple different little interesting aspects to what you hear. But for the sake of today, you can distinctly hear Rell saying, rap, tap, tap. Which then leads us back to the Devil's Triad. Now, me personally, the minute that I saw that the Harrow Warframe was going to be made into a proto-frame, I knew immediately we were getting Rell lore. I don't know the extent of the Rell lore. I just know that Harrow, the indifference, you add those two things together and you get Rell. And seeing the Donda at the last dev stream, not to mention hearing recently Rebecca say even that if you want to get information on Rell, you're going to have to ask Father Leon, meaning that he does have information that he wants to tell us about. And that's amazing. That's absolutely fantastic. Now, I don't know if the Devil's Triad is going to be a story where Rell is, or the idea of Rell lore is front and center within the context of the update itself, or it will be more like a thing where we've come to find this is like kind of a frequent thing that DE's been doing now, where they will embed the lore in continued runs of whatever the thing is going to be. You know, it could be the tower defense thing or the tower run, or, you know, just basic missions with them in it. It's tough to say. I don't know exactly what we're all getting, but I mean, regardless, for me, I'm just super excited because that means I get to sit there and grind for Rell lore. And, you know, that makes me a happy person. I know it might not be everybody's bag, but I am becoming more agreeable to how DE is presenting the story with every single update. Now, would I prefer a full campaign? Absolutely, every time. But I understand, too, that that's just not going to be possible. Okay, I get it. So, knowing that we're going to at least get one, what I would consider major campaign a year, and then having these little breadcrumb things where you go in, and I love the idea of trying to search for new lore. And that's just in playing. That's the thing that they're doing now, is that it's not like you have to go and find the lore necessarily. It's more so that just with just repeated runs, that you will hear something else. It gives me, someone like myself, a reason to keep grinding these missions over and over, because you just never know what little tidbit. It could be a tiny 2 sentences of lore, but the impact of that particular section of English language or whatever that I'm reading or hearing, pick your language wherever you are, you know, stick it in there. It's so much fun. Dare I say, it's kind of like RNG lore. That's the best way I can describe it. Like, you know how when you get, like, say you're playing Borderlands or something like that, and you're going and you're farming for weapons. Well, I'm farming for lore. And that's crazy that DE was able to do this, where they've actually made, many times I don't even care about the resources I get or anything else. I mean, it's a nice thing to add. I love the fact that, like, when I came out of all the, you know, days and days and days and days and days of runs in the Valis Undermines, that I would come out with tons of resources and tons of materials, and I could buy whatever I wanted. But the resources and the grind in that regard really never came to the forefront for me. It was way more that I was like, okay, did I hear this? Okay, I did hear this one. But then, like, every once in a while, there'd be like this one that would just come out of nowhere, or through one of the mushrooms or something like that. And I'd be like, oh my God, now I got to try to record that. Or if I couldn't record it for whatever reason, now I'd have to go back in and try to find it again. Which was actually, like I said, it was a very interesting take that I don't necessarily know that I've experienced in any other game up to this point, which, you know, for someone who is interested in the lore specifically, I think it's a huge thing. So the idea that we're finally going to get some more information on potentially Rell, the Red Veil, Palladino and her forebears, Garmy, the Reign of Chains, the connection between Garmy and Rell. Do they even have one? Or is this some kind of connection that was, let's say, created in another way, like, say, through Entradi? Because we know that Entradi's, you know, been obviously with the Origin system and been into Duviri, and the idea that, you know, now he's going to have some kind of front and center connection with the Harrow Warframe. And if we somehow go off of the timeline that's presented in the Techrot Encore with Lizzie and Flair and what happens to them, are we headed toward a situation where we're going to find out that the thing that Father Leon is so, let's say, upset about is what he did? Like, perhaps making it so that Rell had to do this. A child was forced to do this. Or is there some kind of dark thing that we have, as of yet, not been made aware of, that the procedure forced upon things? And I can understand that, the idea that, hey, the indifference was trapped for, or at least some aspect of it was contained within a warframe for potentially, who knows, decades, centuries? It's tough to say. But I would imagine that now that the indifference, especially the one that's presented in game at this point, that's quite vindictive, dare I say vengeful in a lot of ways, or if nothing else, trying to dole out judgment and punishment, I wonder if there aren't consequences for what happened then. Kind of in the same way of, like, if you ever saw the Pirates of the Caribbean, most people did, but you know how when they made the deal with Calypso to, like, let her go at the end, it kind of wasn't the best deal to make. And in that regard, I keep going back to, in my head, especially in many of the videos that I've done in the past on this in particular, I keep going back to the idea that if they were able to achieve this, and throughout the quest, Palladino just never seems to be fully convinced one way or another that she's actually speaking to Rell or speaking to something else. It just makes me wonder if there isn't going to be an aspect of this quest where we learn that these messages that were offered weren't necessarily from Rell, but rather another side of Rell, let's say, that wanted out. And I think we definitely have, some evidence of that too within the Chains of Harrow quest, specifically at the end. So, the bill comes due. And I wonder, given the amount of hatred that the indifference seems to have towards Entrati and for what he's done, are we talking about, when we are asking Uriel if the Orokin can ever be forgiven, is there more than one, is there multiple aspects where the Orokin need to be forgiven? Not just one, because I think, at least for myself, that was one of the things that I kind of associated with what we ended up doing in the end, mainly because of the result of what happened. I think that's probably the I don't necessarily understand to this point if we had the indifference contained. And I understand that the concept is that Rell's mind was kind of fracturing within the Warframe, and thus that's why we're seeing Rell kind of start to show up within the Origin system, not necessarily in person, but in voice or in presence. But I can't help but keep going back and thinking that perspective of the Chains of Harrow, which I think most of us have, and I think it's even confirmed within the very wiki, But that story may not be 100% accurate. It's very possible that at no point did we ever speak to Rell. And I think you could make the argument that in reality, if he sacrificed himself, would he not have already been gone? I mean, that is, after all, what sacrifice represents, right? So with that in mind, like, again, it's looking at the quest from two different set of eyes. The first one is you see the child and it's speaking periodically, going over his history, different things that occurred, different memories. And in the end, we're left with essentially a being that we've unleashed, and then another being that, in all reality, if you really think about it, like your operator really doesn't look that different from Rell, at least at the very end of the Chains of Harrow, because Rell is transparent. He just has a tiniest little bit of an outline. And I would make the argument that anytime that your operator is in the void, you look the same. So it basically going invisible, if you will, while you're in your operator mode. There's really no difference. And in that regard, I think many people can see where I'm going with this, right? That entity that was released at the end of the Chains of Harrow. Sure, it's Rell, right? But is it possible that that thing was the same thing that shows up on our ship as soon as we get back? It's not like the indifference doesn't do this sort of thing, you know, manipulation, trying to lie, even saying it's someone else, trying to make that claim. These are all the tenets of the man in the wall and how he behaves. But we didn't have all of this body of work, if you will, all this context back then that we do now. And in taken, you know, as kind of a conglomerate with the lore as a whole, I think many people, if you went back to the Chains of Harrow and played it again, under the guise that Rell is gone, at least in that regard. Now, will he show up again in this X99, wherever this is supposed to be in the Devil's Triad? That's tough to say. But I'm saying in the here and now, when we go into that quest, that his sacrifice was already made and that it was holding the man on the wall in Harrow, right? Again, it's a perception. It's a way to look at it. But, you know, we destroy the chains. We release the entity. That's what we do. The only thing that's really in question is was Rell ever even involved? Especially from when the chains are cracked and whatever is released. You can look at that quest now in two very different ways. And I would make the case that actually, given the context that we have now versus then, that I would be inclined to believe that Rell isn't in that quest, at least aside from fractured memories that the indifference would have had, mind you, especially in binding to Rell in some way. He would have had every one of those memories. Not only that, how would Rell be able to project these memories? Further, the messages that we see on the walls that are left, each one isn't necessarily coming from the perspective of Rell. It says, you cast him out. He suffers while you dream. Blinded, she cast him out. You rejected him. He saved you. Why are these not coming from a first-person perspective? Such as, you rejected me. I saved you. Or, blinded, she cast me out. If in fact these are supposed to be messages from Rell. It makes me wonder if during the Chains of Harrow, if much of what we do in Palladino does isn't what we want to have happen. We're trying to believe that this savior, holding the indifference, yeah, still a savior. But them wanting to believe that Rell was still there in some capacity, when in reality, he was long gone. I would even make the argument that some of the things that you see with Palladino and her understanding of the void, it makes you wonder, was Rell giving all these teachings to the Red Veil? Or was the man on the wall acting as Rell, giving all this information about the nature of the void? Perhaps in an effort to humanize, and when the opportunity came where something occurred, that it could break out in some way, shape, or form. Because whatever, something happened, be it an internal situation or an external situation, most likely it has to do with what occurred during the war within, when our operators were like reawoken, if you will, to our abilities and to our, the truth behind how they got their power and everything else. If that's the external reason, you could make that argument that, okay, this was the thing that allowed for, let's say, a crack in the fabric or the nature of their prison, and thus allowed whatever this entity was to begin to act out and need attention. Because I keep going back to it, I don't understand why they would look at wanting to release Rell if in fact they knew specifically that Rell's directive was to essentially bind him there to keep the indifference out. That was his specific ask, if you will, at least in the beginning. So in the Chains of Harrow, just because Palladino is essentially getting emotional about what she's hearing from the indifference and what's happening, and starting to feel for Rell, so much so that she wants to release him. But my question is given everything that we know about the Chains of Harrow, about the indifference, about, how it acts, is it not at least a good idea to ponder the possibility that we let him out? Because that's what he wanted, not Rell. And I wonder if even at some point, if we do get the opportunity to speak to Rell in the conventional sense, if there's some portion of the Devil's Triad or even a future quest or something like that, where there is some kind of legitimate contact with the actual Rell character confirmed, if we won't in fact find out that he says, why did you do this? I did this for a reason. And you let him go. Do you know how hard it was to lure a cosmic being of that nature into something like this? To chain it and bind it? And I mean, I could say he might have similar words for Palladino too. It's like, hey, yeah, by the way, wrong god. And like I said, it makes me very, very curious as to what we're about to get here with this Devil's Triad, but I think potentially even further out, because whereas DE could absolutely decide that this is going to be the definitive point to Rell's story and we're not going to really get much afterwards, the fact that, as I mentioned before, we've continued to get these like little breadcrumbs continuously over and over and over again regarding, you know, Rell or Garmy, but they all seem to come back to that particular character and that particular character's importance. And as I mentioned too, it would make perfect sense because as we know it, holy shit, I just thought of something. Okay, follow me on this one. So what if Rell presented himself back to the Indifference to say, hey, I'm ready to make the deal. I shouldn't say make the deal. I'm ready to make good on the deal. That you saved all the operator, all the kids. So, okay, I'm going to sacrifice myself to you. And we broke that sacrifice. And it just so happens that within the context of the Lotus Eaters, that the Man in the Wall wants us, wants the operators back. This would be post Chains of Harrow, obviously. Oh no. All right, I'm going to present a possibility here. Hopefully if you've stuck around this long, you're going to get this. But what if Rell never had any type of say in the matter? What if the thing that Father Leon is having such guilt over is that they sacrificed Rell in the same way that the Lotus is being told by the Indifference to sacrifice us? And I think we all know already that sacrifice is like the huge theme in Warframe. There's multiple quests where that same line comes up over and over and over again. You know, miracles require sacrifice. And even Rebecca here on a recent, I think it was a dev short, and I can't tell you exactly which one it was, so please don't ask me. But it was within the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 months, where somebody asked her a question, and she even reiterated that, you know, miracles require sacrifice, and it was something story related. And I can't help but think that perhaps even I have been looking at this incorrectly, in that whereas it was looked upon as Rell sacrificing himself, you could use the context of a society sacrificing a virgin and her saying she sacrificed herself for the greater good. Did she? I mean, she did, but was she really excited about doing it, or was that something that she really wanted to do? That might not be necessarily the truth. And I just thought about that like, there is some kind of guilt aspect to this Devil's Triad, and with the Donda sitting on his table, the idea that a Warframe is involved, and the connection with Albert Entrati. Remember, Albert Entrati, he does not care. If he thinks that this thing will stop the Indifference, it's on the table. It could be the most disgusting, horrible, gross, anti-humanitarian, anti-anything, anti-life thing. And if he believed unequivocally that it would, in fact, end this problem with the indifference, he would do what he could to make it happen. This has been proven time and time and time again through his old notes, even through the concept of the Hex Quest, when they originally, essentially, they were all supposed to die. So he doesn't care. So the concept of him taking the Tenno child that's unique, something else that Albrecht and Trotty would have known about, this idea that the indifference appears to go after people of unique status or ability or some level of uniqueness that stands above others in some way. And of course, Rell would have that. And again, with this in particular, I could see the indifference being extremely interested in someone like Rell just for that reason. Every other person who has seen the indifference that it's come into contact with typically has a range of emotions from shock to fear to outright horror. There is one individual who just stares at him and just looks at it for as if the man on the wall was nothing more than just another person. I imagine that would be incredibly intriguing and could have been some level of bait that Albrecht and Trotty used. I hate to say it this way because I always rail on Trotty, but I know that type of mentality that when at all costs, everything's on the table. It doesn't matter who you hurt to get what you want. I've seen that mentality, that ideology far too often. And I know how it is usually just as destructive as the thing it attempts to stomp out. And as I see everything kind of coming together, you have this connection with Father Leon's guilt, Albrecht and Trotty being a connection here. You have this poor child who would be something that may even set the indifference off guard enough to contain it. Who knows, even trick it. Something that we don't typically see. It's usually the other way around. But the idea that there's this other connection that specifically resides within Duviri with the Reign of Chains and Garmy and his Saraglass Lighthouse and all these things kind of having an association with Entrati as well as, obviously with him being there. It makes me wonder if we aren't going to find that poor Rell's story is actually even worse than we originally thought. That this kid was just trying to figure out the indifference, but in doing so became a target of not only the indifference, but also Entrati. Now, I suppose this is going to be something that we're going to have to come back on in a future episode after the Devil's Triad, But I'm just so excited over this whole thing. I have been waiting so long for what I would call more detailed information regarding this very specific topic in Warframe, because I do think that it in itself also allows us to tell more of the story in a more concise way. This is a very important aspect to the Warframe narrative and lore, and we needs it, Precious, You want to know how ready I am? I had another episode already recorded for the first episode. But because of what I heard on, I think it was Tactical Potatoes dev chat video, I didn't scrap it. I'm still going to put that one out, but this felt right as the first episode. especially for this channel, because, I'm a Man on the Wall fanboy. I simultaneously love and hate the Man on the Wall. The Man on the Wall represents everything that, in a personal aspect, that I would rage against. However, in its uniqueness and power and personality, I can recognize, or at least I can respect what I'm seeing. And it intrigues me. And so, just kind of like Rell, I'm obsessed, right? And I want to figure him out. And if we somehow get the ability to talk to Rell, maybe we could even ask him, right? Oh man, there's so many things that are going through my head right now. Like when you go back through that Chains of Harrow quest and you put it under a different purview of, like, Rell being forced to do a thing or tricked into doing a thing, being just another willing sacrifice of Entradi just to, buy another day. that's what he does. And, having someone like a clergyman feeling incredible regret and guilt over such a thing, it makes all the sense in the world. Heck, it may even be why they're all sitting here in purgatory. Maybe they all sacrificed in order to make an aspect of Ventradi's plan fall into play. But again, that is mostly speculation. I think it's one of the best parts about doing something like this, these type of podcast type situations, if you will, that I can just sit there and go off on a tangent and talk about things and not really worry about how much I have to edit out and if it completely makes sense within the context of every little point that I'm trying to make. And even, it opens up the door to potentially some things that maybe I have perceived a particular way that you would or have a different perception of, and you would like to discuss that in the comment section, stuff like that. I would be very intrigued. I'm always interested in trying to soak up the community's understanding of the game. I mean, even, in conjunction with my own, because, more information, it's always better. I'm not going to say I'm going to agree with everything, but if the argument is made and the point is good, then you must take it. So, with that in mind, I hope that you enjoyed this little kind of chat, if you will, about our upcoming fun times here in Warframe. And I really hope you enjoyed this first episode's format in general, because it is something that I can do a lot easier. It obviously is not quite as concise, but at the same time, it's kind of a fun way to just chat. That being said, if you have any thoughts about what else you'd like to have discussed in this format, please leave those too in the comments. I'd love to hear it. I will tell you that one of the things I do want to do with this is give channel members in particular special consideration. So they will be addressed, let's say, first, as far as if they want to have topics specifically discussed. But that doesn't mean that if you're not a member that you won't get looked at either. It's just one of those things that I do want to present to the people who support the channel as another, kind of a little bit of a thank you. If that's something that you would like, feel free to consider joining the channel. There are some other little special perks that you'll get as well. And believe me, I would love to have you here, especially for the member streams. The member streams are a lot more intimate, and in my opinion, they're a bit more fun. I don't want to say anything, streaming is streaming, and it is what it is. And I'm not saying that they're like incredibly more fun, but they are a more intimate setting where we can get a little bit more in depth in some of the conversations because there aren't quite as many questions coming at me. So again, if that is something that you're interested in, feel free to join the channel. We'd love to have you. But at any rate, I hope you tune in for the next episode. And of course, I hope you all have a wonderful day today, a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk at you on the next one. Take care, everybody.
Hey, kiddo. Bye.